what is the purpose of developing conceptual frameworks? It is because to find out the relationship between the independent variables IVs to the DV dependent variable. In this conceptual framework on the screen, I have taken the diabetes, that is the dependent variable, the problem, and I have taken two independent variables, the food that you consume and the exercise that you do. You take my friend John, that big obese man. In his diabetes, the food he consumes may be connected to his diabetes, whereas I have taken the fast bowler Wasim Akram. His diabetes is not connected to his exercise. So if you know there is a connection between the food and the diabetes, you can adjust your food so you can adjust your diabetes level so your problem can be sorted. If you find out the relationship between the exercise that you don't do to the diabetes that you have, if you can increase your exercise, you can bring the diabetes down so you can sort your problem out. So what happens here? You find out the DV and the IVs on your conceptual framework, and you study whether there are relationship between these IVs to the DV. So then if you have the relationship, if you study how that related, we can do some adjustment on the IVs so that you can adjust your DV. When you adjust your DV, your problem is over. This is what the research is about. Now let's have a look at some examples of this relationship. I'm taking the same conceptual framework, diabetes, with the IVs. Now I'm making the exercise, the IV on the x-axis and the dependent variable diabetes on the y-axis, and that is how you do usually. Your IVs are on the x-axis and the DV is on the y-axis. Now you collect data of exercise for 5 days or for 4 days, every day how much exercise do you do, and you note that in the graph, and on that particular day against the exercise how much is your blood sugar level. You can collect the data for that as well, and you can put them in a graph like this. And if you keep a graph like this, you get this relationship, negative relationship, because the graph is like this, and the linear, there is a line, so linear relationship. In this case we can understand when exercise increases, the diabetes decreases. So exercise has a negative relationship with the diabetes. The more exercise you do, the less the diabetes is. And there's a solution for you now based on this relationship you have found out. If you increase your exercise, you can decrease your diabetes. So the doctors would recommend you go for some extra exercise so you would solve your diabetes. This is the relationship. Now it's a turn for food and diabetes on the same conceptual framework. You take the data of food consumption for 4 days and you take the data of diabetes on those 4 days against that food consumption, and you bring those to a graph like this. In this graph, food is as usual on the x-axis because it is the independent variable, and diabetes is going to the y-axis because as usual it is the dependent variable. Now if you put this data point in this graph, you will have a positive linear graph, positive linear relationship. When I say positive, when the food increases, diabetes also increase, and the food decreases, diabetes also decreases. So same direction. This is how we get the data for these two factors, and we can have a message out of this. Doctors may tell you the more food you consume, the more diabetic you become. So reduce your food so that you can control your diabetes. That is a solution for this problem. What is positive linear relationship and negative linear relationship? When you have a graph like this, you have the IV and the DV. When the IV goes up, the DV goes up as well in the same direction. When IV comes down, the DV also comes down in the same direction as well. There is positive relationship. Both of these factors will move in the same direction. But opposite to this is the negative linear relationship. When IV goes up, the DV comes down. When IV comes down, the DV goes up. Opposite relationship. So when one moves in one direction, the other one move on the opposite direction. This is negative linear relationship. The relationship between the IV and the DV may be reverse U-shaped as well, as shown in the screen. A good example is this: the more hours you study, the better grade you get. That is the usual concept. There is a linear relationship, a positive linear relationship. You study 1 hour, you get a grade. You study 2 hours, you get better grade, and you study 3 hours, you get better, even better grade. Fine. But after certain amount of hours of studies, your grade will decline. If you study 20 hours, your grade will decline because your brain wouldn't be able to cope up with these learning hours. So you have to go up to a certain amount of time, and if you go beyond that, your grade will decline again. So that is why the graph is like reverse U-shaped. In some researches, you may find out there is no relationship between the IV and the DV. A good example is the water consumption and the diabetes. You consume water and you study whether the water consumption influences the blood sugar. So we can do something about it, and you may get data everywhere in the graph. There is no linear relationship, either positive or negative. So here there is no relationship. Water consumption is as usual the IV, that is on the x-axis, and the diabetes is on the y-axis, and there is no relationship. The data is everywhere. In some case, you may get exponential relationships. So you will have a weak positive graph like this, and after some point you would see the graph suddenly goes up to the top. This is exponential relationship.